I think that sustainable technology is inherently performant for the most part. And I think that those two things actually, they're pretty well associated with each other.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Green.io. I'm Gaël Duez, and in this podcast, we empower responsible technologists to build a greener digital world, one bite at a time. Twice a month, on a Tuesday, our guests from across the globe share insights, tools, and alternative approaches, enabling people within the tech sector and beyond to boost digital sustainability. How is sustainability covered in main tech conferences? Sure, cybersecurity, DevOps, and its DORA metrics, or anything related to SRE is covered at length. Did I forget to mention AI? Not anymore. But what room is left for the environmental impact of our job? And what are the main trends which are filtered out from specialized conferences like Green.io or EcoCompute to non-specialized conferences, the big tech conferences? And to talk about it, I'm delighted today to have Erica Pisani with us. So Erica lives in Canada, Toronto. She's a seasoned software engineer in a FinOps company. And when she doesn't work, she enjoys playing violin and walking in the woods with her dog, which might give us hints on why she eventually managed to be the MC of the Performance and Sustainability track at QCon London this year. So I'm really glad to have you on the show, Erica, and that's going to be a great debrief that we're going to have.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. I'm super excited to join Green.io.
You're more than welcome. So, Erica, how did you end up being the MC of the Performance and Sustainability track at QCon London this year? And please share with us the long version where you explain how you started to get interested in IT sustainability in the first place. And is there any, maple syrup involved? Yeah, I know, terrible cliche. Go for it.
No, I do love maple syrup. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily part of the story. But I guess the longer story is I originally, so the punchline, I guess, here is I came to sustainability in software development through edge computing. And really, I started looking at edge computing because I just didn't know what the heck it was. A couple of years ago, every cloud provider and I was working at Netlify at the time. Every cloud provider from Netlify to Vercel and Cloudflare and AWS, they were going on and on about compute power being available at the edge, data being available at the edge. My coworkers were so excited about edge functions launching. And I straight up had no idea what they were talking about. And the best way for me to learn stuff is to try and learn it as if I was going to teach it, which is that age-old advice. So to motivate myself to learn about the edge, I ended up deciding on a whim to pitch a lightning talk of I'm going to talk about the edge and I'm going to talk about why it's important and exciting for software developers. No sustainability component in it whatsoever. It was just I wanted to learn more about it. And fortunately, it got picked up because it was this huge thing. And I got extremely lucky that, through the grapevine of conferences, my talk got the attention of a member of the programming committee at QCon London in 2023. So I go to QCon London, and I can't remember what the track was at the time, but there was a sustainability track there at the time, and Sarah Bergman was speaking. And I remember going to see her talk, and I'm sitting there, and I can't remember the name of the talk exactly, but she's, talking about the different scopes and the stuff that you see in the Building Green Software book. And as I'm sitting watching her talk about this, I realized that the edge that I'd been focusing on for so long could actually play a part in the sustainable tech movement. And so I ended up completely overhauling my talk because I was just like, I just want to focus on learning more about sustainability in tech and how this can tie in and we can leverage it in this really amazing way. And I got so excited that, for me, it felt like one of those turning points in how I view my career, where I wanted to start looking through how I build software through that lens a lot more seriously. And because I was so excited about this, another programming committee member, maybe about a year later, because she kept hearing me talk about and we kept in touch just because we met at the conference, got along. And she's like, so we have another like sustainable track that's going to be at QCon. And at that time I'd been doing a few different conferences and was kind of tapped out. I needed a break. So she's like, you don't have to do it this year, but consider it maybe for next year. And so, 2025, QCon London is about to roll around. And she asked again, like, would you be interested? And I was like, I'm recovered. I am ready to go. Let's do this. And so that's how I ended up hosting the track this year.
Excellent. That's really, really cool to kickstart with something you don't know and having this approach like, I want to teach about it to make sure that I understand about it, which is, I must admit, a bit of my approach as well. Like I love ending up teaching pretty fast when I'm investigating a new field, because that's the only way to actually put your brain in order on everything that you've heard and double checking on what you might have heard that is something that is not always purely backed by science or research papers. So yeah, I got you on this one.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but for me, I sometimes, when I'm in a rush to solve a problem, I sometimes hand wave over things I don't understand and just keep going. And when you force yourself to like, okay, someone's going to ask this question, you have to understand why it's behaving in this particular way. It's so much better in the long run, but it's definitely always tempting to skip when you just want to get the shiny thing working.
And it's especially true when you've got some momentum in the field, like in green IT or IT sustainability at the moment, where there are more and more, and that's a good news, there are more and more people getting involved, talking about it, posting about it. I mean, my LinkedIn field could be read for the entire day, 8 hours nonstop. With this sort of constant media production, we tend to forget about the longer form of thinking, which is, reading a book or preparing a course. And that helps actually to structure much more the topics you're investigating rather than just, I've heard about him. I've heard about her. She did something amazing. She said something amazing. But at the end, how do you connect all the dots is really missing. That's my feeling when I'm reading too much my LinkedIn field, which is, I guess, the only social network that I've still.
Yeah, no, I understand. And even just like all the newsletters available out there too. Wow. It's very overwhelming.
And I play guilty for the Green IO one, but it's a monthly only. I choose the reason for the
It's
reason.
one of the few that's like gone through my, what's the word now? My frequent like just purges of my newsletter.
Oh yeah.
Inbox. Yeah. It's managed to stay the test of time.
That's a good test. Okay. Erica, let's talk a bit about QCon this year in April. It was. Were you also in charge of sourcing, finding the speakers?
Yeah. So I was asked to be a track host. So QCon London happened in end of March, beginning of April. And I had to start doing my research and reaching out in September, October of 2024. And so, yeah, I kind of had the themes. I could make of it what I would. And I was responsible for almost creating the story that I wanted to tell in the context of performance and sustainability through the speakers that I was selecting. There were some restrictions because, budgetary reasons for conferences, like on geographies. And obviously they're hosted in London. They want to see some folks that are based in that tech community. But otherwise, the conference was really great for track hosts like myself to find who we wanted and invite them in.
Well, that's a pretty prestigious name. So I guess when you reach out to someone, say, hey, would you consider talking to QCon and submitting a talk? Usually the door doesn't slam on your face like, wow.
I'm not going to lie. It was very helpful to be able to say I was coming from QCon London.
Okay, excellent. So that being said, what were the top trends you witnessed in green IT within your sustainability and performance track in QCon London, but also feel free to elaborate a bit on the bigger conference. It's just that I'm not 100% sure that you had the time to actually enjoy the rest of the conference. So I don't want to push you out of your comfort zone thinking, oh, well, I read the program, but that's pretty much it.
I know. I was very glad my track was the first day because after the first day I was zonked. I can't imagine doing 2 days of a conference and then having to host the track. I'll start with the general theme of, I guess, the wider conference from what I was able to pick out. Obviously, AI is the thing right now. A lot of people are talking about AI's impact on the tech world, on the wider world. There was someone who, if I remember correctly, was giving a keynote even just like on design and how design is kind of being impacted in positive and negative ways with AI. There was a significant number of talks that talked about AI, and if it wasn't the main feature, it was at least touched on and referenced on how it was impacting the topic that was being discussed. But I would say there was still a good variety of topics being spoken about at the conference. It wasn't so dominating that it was just like QCon had become an AI conference. It was just because
AIcon.
it's playing because it's playing such a large part in software right now and has been for a couple of years. It is understandably taking a lot of space in people's minds, and there's a lot of questions. And so there's a lot of speakers that are stepping to the plate to talk about how AI is affecting things in different ways. In terms of the themes of the performance and sustainability track, one of the themes that I would say, so in terms of the talks that were selected, they covered different things in general. I wanted to kind of talk about how you advocate maybe for sustainability initiatives at a leadership level, because one of the common questions that would come up from audience members is, how do you get buy-in from the wider organization? There's a lot of like software developers will listen about like, yes, this does matter. We know it's important, but we still have to tell business leaders something to be able to take the time to experiment with gathering metrics, understanding what metrics do we need to gather. As Sarah has mentioned before, I think in one of your recent episodes for Green IO, sometimes it's not entirely precise, and that can be difficult to get buy-in for if it's not like you have 100% certainty that these metrics are going to give you a clear picture of, let's say, the carbon emissions of your software stack. And so one theme was like, okay, as an organizational leader, how do you get buy-in from the wider organization and start adopting more sustainability practices so that you can move in the direction that you want to move? Obviously, I had a AI featured there, so I had someone come and talk about how to develop AI in more resource-constrained environments. AI most of the time is talking about, developing big LLMs with massive amounts of data, and obviously it's well known about AI's energy consumption. So I wanted to have someone be able to speak to, how do you make AI performant in a smaller scale, which means that it's more sustainable.
Who was the speaker?
Jade Abbott. So she is the CTO of Lalapa AI, and she's based out of South Africa. And as she talks, I know the talk it's not live to the public yet, but she talks a little bit about how South Africa has unique constraints environment-wise. Like you can't depend on constant running electricity to be running these big or training these large language models for, let's say, 2 weeks straight. So it was a really interesting talk to hear how to build those things. And then local first software is not just within a sustainability and perspective, but in general, it's becoming more interesting across the board because it's a very performant way to build software. And so that was something that we were able to highlight in this track. And obviously Sarah was on the talk and talking about, or on the track and was talking about metrics and how to gather that information. That's also a question people often have, is how do we capture information to be able to take action on it? Because you can't act on something that you can't measure and move toward a better outcome.
And did she talk about the observability versus good old
metrics
she debate?
Did. Yes, a little bit. She got a lot of great stuff in the 40 minutes that she had. And I'm actually excited when the recordings come out to rewatch it again, because obviously there's so much information you take in a conference.
So you mentioned the buy-in being one of the main topic. What would be the 2, 3, 4 main insights that you've got from these different talks? So Sarah's talk, who else was actually talking about the buy-in? C-level buy-in.
Ludi.
Ludi.
And I wanted
obviously.
Ludi, because she had experience decarbonizing tech stacks at one of her companies, whose name I forget at the moment.
Looney.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
My daughter's got one, so that's pretty easy. It's a Storybox.
Oh, okay. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was probably the largest theme. And from there, it's how to have more sustainable AI, how to develop more sustainable software, those were, I think, that like the big themes that came out of that track, and that there were often a lot of questions about.
So, and how, I'm going back to my previous questions, how can we get some buy-in? What were the main insights shared by Ludi and Sarah and some other speakers? Like, do you recall some vivid examples of things to do or not to do, actually?
Well, in Sarah's talk, I realize it can sometimes be a bit of a challenge to do this, but be okay with accepting the use of proxy metrics that are perhaps not perfect. And I think even to ask business leaders to do this is obviously a bit of a challenge, or like organizational leaders is a bit of a challenge. But even as speaking as a software engineer, to have to take metrics that I know are not completely accurate is a bit challenging even for me to sit with. And I think she made a very good point that it's better to have at least something that's somewhat approximate and close to what we want, and at least be able to somewhat measure it and improve it over time, than to be completely blind as to what the state of the software stack is in terms of our sustainability initiatives, if we have them, or if we have certain concrete ones in the organization. And for getting buy-in, Ludi, I think, really accurately summed it up, or one of her great points anyway, was that it is a business risk to just gloss this over. The weather is becoming increasingly unpredictable. Data centers are not necessarily going to be safe from these massive, seemingly once in a generation storms that seem to be coming every year. Yeah. And taking that seriously now, even starting to get in the mindset of we need to think about this, I think it's only a matter of time. And I think there's some, I can't necessarily quote the specific regulations and stuff like that, but governments are starting to make it a regulatory thing. And so regulatory considerations are something every business pays attention to anyway. So if you're getting on the right foot now, it makes it far less painful in the future, because this is going to come.
It's interesting, this resiliency approach, because it goes so much against our culture in the tech space at the moment, which is like, there is no limit. Sky is the limit, which is actually true. Sky is the limit. It is called the greenhouse gas emissions in the sky is the blood limit. But that's a different, but that's a different issue. I think it's good that we have these talks and people speaking up on this, and maybe rebounding on, what happens around us, like what happened in Spain and Portugal, should be a wake-up call to pretty much everyone running a 24/7 infrastructure, because suddenly you can have no electricity. For the moment, backup generator are available for everyone, blah, 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 blah. But hey, for how long, and what is the cost actually to running all of this?
Yeah, and at least closer to home for me, we had some terrible wildfires over the past number of years. Wildfire season starts increasingly earlier and earlier every year. And I think probably the most memorable thing that happened with that wildfire season was a few years ago, when the smoke from the wildfires in Canada were blanketing New York, and it seemed like an eerie Mars-like situation.
And not so fun fact, I use in quite a lot of my public talks now, the wildfire in Canada, to get some proportion from people, and I ask them what is the size of the country that is equivalent to the burnt area from the wildfires, and people that don't imagine. So the proper answer is Nepal, and then when you put it the Nepal map on the average European country or the average even US state, it's pretty big. Suddenly oh my God, this is insane. But the problem is it's often pushed back as some ecological concern. I mean, the connection with our tech world is not made that much. This is why all this water stress for data centers or energy stress becomes that much important. And you mentioned another trend that you nurtured in your track, which was efficiency, software efficiency, running software with less energy. I guess Holly Cummins talked about cloud zombies, but were there other insights also? And what did she mention also?
So obviously the zombie server thing is a good one. Another one being that I'm going to be paraphrasing here, but efficiency there's a limit to efficiency. There is a limit to how, and I think this is even worth noting in the sustainability context, because we may take the idea that we may need to run fewer servers at a much higher degree of like utilization to help ensure that we reduce the amount of carbon emissions that we have. And there's a fine balance there where if you were to run servers maybe at too high of an efficiency, and the example that Holly had given was that of like a combustion engine in a car. There's a theoretical maximum efficiency that it has, but it's designed to run at far lower than that threshold because you don't want to wear the engine out. And similarly, that's something that we have to consider when we're trying to like resource capacity plan, where we want to make sure we have enough servers to handle the amount of traffic, not as low as like, what was the quote that she had? Maybe like 12 to 18% of the capacity of a server's used. That's obviously way too low. But we can't necessarily be at 90 to 100% because now we might be running the risk that our carbon emissions are related to the embodied carbon cost of having to replace our hardware frequently. And she also tied it back really well to just even like humans working way too hard all the time and needing to still take time to rest. And I think that's something that is important in a world like ours, where we are trying to build more sustainable software in a world that is increasingly getting hotter. And it can sometimes feel like we need to work at 100% all the time to get closer to that. But I liked Holly's talk in that it also reminds you to rest a little bit, take care of yourself, because you can't be running at 100% all the time.
Do we need all of this? and all of this that far?
Yes.
And that fast. That's super interesting what you've mentioned, because it connects with two dots. First of all, what Holly mentioned is really literally backed by science and researchers, such as, I know that I'm quoting him a lot, but the Professor P.S. Lee in Singapore, who's like this big expert on water cooling and really study the impact on hardware of how you manage a data center in tropical area. He has provided me tons of feedback, and that was one of his feedback, like, the hardware, it has some sort of a sweet spot for running operations. And even if it's not like the max capacity sold by the hardware providers, actually above a certain threshold, you really, as you said, you're significantly decreasing its lifespan. So obviously increasing the emission via the embodied carbon, because you will have to replace sooner the gear. And so that was really like connecting in my mind when you mentioned it. And it also connected to something else, that we should be cautious about all this talk about how much energy we waste or how much server capacity we waste. In Green IO Singapore this year, we had this talk from this AWS software engineer. He was showing this graph of how much unused capacities on average you could find on standard AWS server. And I think we should be very cautious about this theoretical number, and it might be proven way lower in like true operational condition. And going back to the track itself, what else shall we talk about?
One of the, I think, things that was really exciting about just hosting the track too is seeing there seemed to be like this effect where as more people came to the different talks and people started hearing about the different topics that were in the track, there was increasingly higher amounts of people coming as to the track as the day went on. And it seemed like a lot of folks were really excited and really engaged. And I think that that's really encouraging to see, that when folks are aware of the sustainability stuff that we can work on in tech that we have available to us, like it seems like it's more, we know what we need to do, and we have some ideas of what we can do, and it's just a matter of executing on it. People are really excited to take that back to their organizations and start adopting it themselves. I know sometimes like you see some talks where like folks just don't know what to ask, but that's not what I saw at QCon. Like everyone was super keen, which I love to see it. And that made me like really excited for my speakers as well, because I'm glad that they got to see just how excited people were about sustainable tech.
And having a lot of questions is always a very good sign for a speaker, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And actually it connects with a question I wanted to ask you, all this momentum in people showing up more and more over the day. Because I was wondering, why did you choose to name your track Sustainability and Performance? And was it the only angle, performance, to attract devs' attention? Was it like, if you had mentioned only sustainability or green IT, was it not enough? What is your explanations for this choice?
Well, I have to admit, I didn't get to necessarily call the track that. Like, it came in as performance and sustainability. I could make some tweaks to it, but for the most part, it was like, we have this idea that we would like this track to be this. Do you feel comfortable putting together a track for this? And I think, though, that it was well named, because I think performance is something that a lot of software developers usually, that's often the stuff that they're running into in their day-to-day works, and something that's very front of mind. They're dealing with like too slow of an application in this respect, or this database isn't responding well in this capacity. And so they're looking for solutions and ideas on how they can tackle the performance challenges that they maybe have in their organization, or they're anticipating that there will be challenges and want to know ahead of time. That being said, I think that sustainable technology is inherently performant for the most part. And I think that those two things actually, they're pretty well associated with each other. And I thought, as I was building the track, that angle I thought was very important to me, because you can have the best of both worlds in this sense. You can look to build performance software, and by looking to build performance software, you can work toward creating a more sustainable future with the tech that you're building. And I didn't want it to seem like you had to pick either or. There is a lot of opportunities for both. That was also why I really doubled down on that title for the track.
Yeah, makes sense. And anyway, if this is a wording that would attract people, I think you made a really good choice to use it to make sure that your room is full, and then they got exposed to the great content. If the room is empty, I mean, that's pointless to have like the most technical possible talk on sustainability and scope 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and whatnot. I got your point.
Yeah, but it is good, like, even just to have almost like if you can envision the software that you ultimately have at the end of the day that happens to be sustainable, and ultimately, like, I want to see a sustainable future, and so it's like a little bit like I'm pulling that messaging in a bit. I think it makes it more real for people. It doesn't feel as like an abstract theory.
I completely got it. I've got a question. I'm always curious about what is mentioned when people are talking about sustainability and planetary boundaries and the likes. Was it like mostly about carbon and energy, or were other environmental impacts such as water, resource exhaustion, etc., also mentioned?
Water resources and stuff like that was mentioned in the talks themselves. Jade and Holly both called that out specifically in their talks. For the folks that were like on the other side, the attendees, they tended to think more in terms of the energy. Not to say that they weren't thinking also about the water usage and stuff like that, but I think usually when folks were asking questions, it was more like, I want to reduce the energy consumption of my data center to reduce my emissions, more than it's consuming X liters of water every day.
Which makes sense, because this is their main proxy metrics to act like on day one. I mean, if you decide to migrate your cloud or even to do like carbon-aware computing, it requires the DevOps and the Ops and sometimes the sysadmin to be put in the loop, and it's a longer game. And QCon being really focused on dev and DevOps, starting with energy makes a lot of sense. But what you shared is very positive news, because I remember that 3 years ago in Main Tech Conference, just talking about energy savings was really a revolution. And now if it goes beyond, and some talks mention also water, that's a very positive sign. Okay.
Yeah, and even those metrics, like, we're getting better at tracking them, but Ludi called out in her talk, like, it can be difficult to get really concrete measurements sometimes on that alone. And so if we're looking to gather more information on, let's say, water usage, that's going to be something that we'll have to advocate for with our cloud providers to start giving us more information in that respect as well.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Okay, so Erica, thanks a lot for the wrap up of this 5 talks at QCon London. Can I ask you maybe 2 last questions?
Of course.
What's next for you? In the sustainability area, of course.
Of course. There's a few different things I'd like to look at on the side for myself. Like I've had a few different ideas kicking in my head, partially inspired by like some of the talks I'd seen at QCon and just from like following other folks in the field. One of them being because I in my role right now at the financial tech company, we use Django, which is like a framework that's been around for ages. And I can't remember who the person was on Blue Sky that kind of gave me this friendly nudge, but there was this whole discussion happening in a Django forum of people trying to figure out how to best measure like carbon emissions or energy usage of Django apps. And there wasn't necessarily some good consensus on it. And so that's something that I'm hoping to take a look at some point with what free time I have.
Interesting.
And then otherwise, I'm still just trying to learn from everyone else right now. I'm and what I am learning and at least having some ideas about, I end up blogging about. So that's kind of what's next for me right now.
Sense. And you mentioned resources and stuff that you've learned. Would you like to share with the audience your main sources of information, except for QCon London, obviously, this year?
Yeah. I really like following the folks at the Green Software Foundation. Sometimes I'll take a look at they have working groups that are looking at like developing papers on, let's say recently, I think they did a working group on AI, and I'm just interested in seeing what they're thinking of in terms of developing more sustainable AI. I also like following, I don't know his last name, but his first name is Wilco, and he's very active.
Wilcoff, yeah.
Yes. So he's someone that I follow and just like pay attention to, as well amazing. As yeah, and Sasha Lucioni. Even though I don't work in AI, I still love listening to or not necessarily listening to, but what she writes, I tend to read as well. And then I listen to Green IO, which is also how I've been getting some of my, my information.
Okay, thanks a lot for this. And maybe to close the podcast on our usual positive a piece of news, would you like to share something? I know that you're based in North America, so it's not that easy at the moment, but would you like to share a positive piece of news regarding sustainability or life in general? I don't know.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, like I mentioned before, I got like really interested in edge computing. So I've gone deep down that rabbit hole of understanding more about how people are investing in it and how it's growing over the years. And I think something that's got me really excited and that makes me like, I consider a wonderful piece of good news is that as more distributed computing, obviously distributed computing is a thing already, but like as it gets more adopted in an edge computing sense, there's really cool opportunities for things like smaller edge data centers incorporated into maybe urban environments where the data centers can heat buildings. And by being able to be used in that way, we can actually significantly reduce carbon emissions of heating buildings, which is a major, major source of carbon emissions. And that like, I don't know why I'm nerding out so much about that, but I think that's an amazing piece of news, especially being in a colder climate like Canada.
Yeah. I was about to say that in tropical area, that's kind of the opposite. Like, what do you do with this extra heat? And, to bounce back on what you said, this edge computing and this CDN stuff and all of the likes is really something that I'm trying to investigate more and more, because on one hand, yes, it can be the case that having, less network to travel through, we can reduce somehow not the immediate environmental footprint of data because it has almost zero elasticity, but the, I would say, midterm, long-term sizing of the overall network. So it makes sense like to have computing capacity closer to the end user. But on the other end, if you look at how the world is decarbonizing, there are huge gaps. And I'm always wondering, like, if I'm, I don't know, I'm going to try to take a North American example, but if I've got users based in Ohio, do I really want to do edge computing in Ohio? As far as I remember, the grid is pretty dirty there, rather than hosting most of my server capacity in Quebec, where I think it's one of the lowest carbon electricity grid in North America. So this trade-off, I think I've never seen any article, any research paper truly embracing it and trying to tackle it. So correct me if I'm wrong. And if any listener had some research paper, please send them my way. But yeah, that's a real challenge for me. And I'm curious to hear what you have to say, because you're the edge expert. I'm like, talking about it, but I've got an expert, so I'm going to ask the question to the experts.
No, don't worry. So the question is more like how to balance like having edge data centers, let's say, in dirtier grids compared to just hosting in. Yeah, no, that's a very good question, and I think I would also be very interested in this research paper should it exist. I think that is one of those things that it's going to be one of those design architectural decisions, because to your point, if I'm in North America and I, being based in Toronto, I have this wonderful data center that is one of the greenest in the grid, not that like a 4-hour drive away from me. I would rather use that data center and test whether hosting stuff at the edge in Toronto makes, from the reduction in the distance traveled of the request, does that make a meaningful difference to host that stuff here, where we may need to be burning in the middle of winter fossil fuels to be able to supply the electricity grid? Or is it better to just rely entirely on the data center? I don't have necessarily a good concrete answer for that, but I think that I would love to see there be tests done on that, because depending on, I guess, the fossil fuel that's being used in that particular grid, there can be a very meaningful difference to hosting everything on the data center, not leveraging the edge, versus leveraging the edge heavily and getting the reduction in emissions from not having the request travel as far.
Agree. If you ever want to resume your studies and do a PhD, you've got a research.
Yeah, I have lots of material now.
But anyway, well, thanks a lot, Erica. That was cool to do this wrap-up episode about QCon. I wonder if the listeners will enjoy it as well. So please feel free to comment, because if so, we will do more. There are other great tech conferences also that are focusing more and more on sustainability. But it was also great meeting you. I was not aware of how involved you were in the field. So I'm very glad that we connected now. So thanks a lot for joining the show.
Thank you again so much for having me. This was a blast.
Low carbon blast.
Low carbon blast. Yes, always.
Talk to you soon, Erica.
You too. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this Green.io episode. Because accessible and transparent information is in the DNA of Green.io, all the references mentioned in this episode, as well as the full transcript, are in the show notes. You can find these notes on your favorite podcast platform and, of course, on our website, greenio.tech. Now, if you enjoy this interview, please take 30 seconds to give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Sharing this episode on social media or directly with fellow software practitioners seems also a good idea if they couldn't attend QCon this year. You got the point. Being an independent media, we rely mostly on you to get more responsible technologists on board. In our next episode, we will welcome Rainer Karcher, a pillar of the sustainableIT.org association and a climate activist in a suit, as he likes to describe himself. We will talk about the importance of not deprioritizing future readiness, which is what is the current backlash against ESG doing, and what IT and digital has to do with it. Stay tuned. By the way, Green.io is a podcast and much more, so visit greenio.tech to subscribe to our free monthly newsletter, read the latest articles on our blog, and check the conferences we organize across the globe. New York was a blast last month, and the next one is in Munich on July 2nd and 3rd. As a Green.io listener, you can get a free ticket to any Green.io conferences using the voucher Green.io VIP. Just make sure to have one before the 30 free tickets per conference are all gone. I'm looking forward to meeting you there to help you, fellow responsible technologists, build a greener digital world.
One bite at a time.